Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Jody.
Hello.
Jody, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone out there?
I'm a doctoral student with the British Library and the University of Sussex. I've recently passed my doctorate, so I'm technically a doctor now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I study, or I research, I guess, the political pamphlets of mostly the Communist Party in America between about 1917 and 1945, give or take a few years, and as well as sort of anti-communist pamphlets and all that kind of movement during the interwar period, that's generally my thing at the moment.
Do you do both sides, or do you just do one particular side?
So my focus is largely on the Communist Party because they were the biggest producer of pamphlets during this period. However, because of the kind of nature of the pamphlet, through my research, it's a very sort of back and forth discursive kind of medium. So I was quite interested when I came across quite a few interesting anti-communist pamphlets as well. So I worked to integrate that into my work. So I do that kind of back and forth, particularly looking at the Catholic anti-communist movement, which was quite prolific, particularly in the 1930s. So that's kind of what I do.
What are you particularly looking for when you're going through these pamphlets? Is it just to help educate yourself or try and find similarities with things that are going, I guess, any possible maybe things that are happening today? Because it seems like there's propaganda everywhere you look. It's kind of hard. There's a whole push right now for misinformation, disinformation. I mean, YouTube likes to blend those lines in together. I think I had one video taken down for medical disinformation that was then put back up because they realized all I was talking about was that Disney is probably leading every major national disaster that's ever happened as a joke. But they get so much content uploaded on there. It's very hard for an algorithm or some type of bot machine to be able to sift through those things. But I mean, Joe Rogan's probably the best name to talk about is because his controversial podcast now, he has all these people that are all these doctors and all these people that work in these types of fields, and it's constantly being taken down. Spotify actually has not released his newest episode because they're having conflicts with the deal. And it's getting to that point of like, what's true, what's wrong, where do I go, how do I know what to do, should I bring an umbrella when I go outside, that type of talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of like a couple of questions in that. My reason for looking at pamphlets in the first place was kind of inorganic because I was basically given this project by the British Library, who had quite the collection of American political pamphlets, and they were basically like, have a look at them and see what you find. So it was kind of very I kind of just sort of spent at least a year just kind of finding pamphlets in the British Library and just looking at them and seeing what they had to say about the period. And as that went on, it kind of unraveled, and I discovered myself like who were the leading pamphlet producers, who were the most prominent political players in that regard. And it's quite interesting, particularly when you talk about like fake news and stuff. I would say that from what I've seen of pamphlets, they do have that kind of the discourse that is represented through pamphlets is quite similar to the discourse that we have online. Having said that, there is no equivalent online to a pamphlet now. It's quite interesting because the pamphlet, I guess, is still used by some groups, but it's nowhere near as prolific as it used to be,
Yeah.
basically in every other century. So it's hard to say. I wouldn't say blogs are like it. I wouldn't say Twitter's like it or anything like that. They're a very specific medium that has kind of been lost. But the way that they functioned was this kind of, in the sort of way that the internet does, where you can kind of just say anything, put it out there, and just see if it catches on. Um, so there was like a lot of pamphlet wars and stuff, and there were typically, especially in the middle, the early modern period in Europe, they were described mostly by like important people as being scurrilous and full of lies and stuff, mainly because their criticism was aimed at the powerful people in society. So they didn't like that, obviously. But even as you come into the 20th century, there's still this kind of backlash against pamphlets. Even in the US, where there is kind of this idea in law, a couple of cases um, where it has been shown that like pamphlets are part of US history. So Thomas Paine's Common Sense, for example, they talk about how important this free distribution of information is. But at the same time, they worked, there was in many instances in US history where they worked to stop left-wing pamphlets being distributed and whatnot. In terms of disinformation, though, as well, the interesting thing is that largely the most factually incorrect pamphlets were produced during the first Red Scare in 1919 by anti-communists, particularly about the events of the Russian Revolution and the people involved in it. And there was quite the upsurge in anti-Semitic kind of conspiracy theories around then, particularly one pamphlet basically put out by the a US government sort of agency that was created during the war. And they promoted this very easily provable false theory with like all false documents and stuff, and distributed it around America. And it was completely false. So it's interesting that, to me anyway, in terms of like the actual information that's being given, the more obviously faked stuff was actually coming from the right and actually partially endorsed by the government. And I think that's quite pertinent to what we see today as well.
I think the narrative switched a little bit. It seems like the left's attacking the right more than anything. I don't. I say this is why. Like, I bet it gets so hard for you not to focus on politics now because you're
Yeah.
examining the ones back then, and you can see probably common correlations. Because I mean, when I think of disinformation, when I think of propaganda or anything of that sort, I think of Marlboro cigarettes when they used to tell you, "Oh yeah, your children even smoke Marlboro cigarettes," and they had posters of
Mm,
kids smoking cigarettes, and it's like we know that should never be the case now because we know
hmm
how bad those are. But I mean, the sugar industry lying that has completely messed up the whole health industry, saying that it's actually fat's bad for you, paying off all these doctors with the cheapest amount of money. I think it was $50,000 to be able to create false reports and all these things that, oh no, it's not sugar that's bad for you, it's fat,
mm,
leading
mm,
to obesity and a lot of issues that we still deal with in the health industry, where they're still trying to figure out keto, vegan, whatever it is going to be the best diet for you to be able to do whatever. It's just interesting to me because I think when you were saying like it's not really like it's a different thing, like it's not like the same thing like the pamphlets. In some
yeah.
cases, yeah, I think when the internet first started, it was kind of like if somebody said something about someone like maybe in high school or elementary school or something, man, people ran with it. That was kind of the
Yeah.
thing. And then now there's a giant safety net on the internet, which is good and bad. Honestly, I'm a freedom of speech guy. So I don't want people saying horrible things about other people on the internet. But if I say that I just want that gone, then I would be a hypocrite because then I wouldn't
Mm,
want the full scale thing of it because I see the boundary get pushed every single time. I see YouTube constantly updating their stuff for safety and it's their private thing. They can do that. But it just gets very, very difficult to be able to be like Mark Zuckerberg. his whole thing, he came out and said that his fact checkers aren't really fact checkers. They're people that agree with his narrative. And it's like, well, if he can do it, that means everyone else can do it, right? Like Twitter's not above Facebook, and then you
Mhm.
start getting into these weird lines of territories where is this propaganda all over again? Am I getting the wrong information? I mean, North Korea, for instance, the Aomi Park, she came over to the States and escaped North Korea, and she thought she would touch people from over here on their arm to check if they were warm because they were told that they were all Americans were cold-blooded. They took it literally. They didn't know. It's kind of like having access to the internet, but the only internet that they give you, not all the full scale broad of what the internet can go to, which I don't
Mm.
know if that relates to anything with the pamphlets, for instance, but I think it just brings into an era of information that everyone is seeking. Everybody's looking for the proper answer. And even though something can sound so ridiculous, if it's written down or if it's labeled in a certain type of media way, people will run with that. I mean, the
Mhm.
number networks or the letter networks, for instance, CNN, ABC, we know that there's BS that goes on with them, but they're on TV. So a lot of people still run by that narrative by like, I'll trust that CNN said it. ABC said it. It was like, but yesterday you said CNN was dog crap. And you're like, yeah, but today they agree with my narrative. It's like, okay, so are we cherry picking or are you just refusing to look at a different side or something that goes against your
Mm.
point? And that's kind of where we land into this whole political feud that you see on Twitter all the time, is because there's constantly something being posted up and then taken down. And then there's a large group of people that think their whole side's being censored, where I've seen Middle Ground before, which is a YouTube series that brings in like Satanists and then Christians. And they have all these people just come together and talk about the issues. Left and right, they all said the same exact things of our side censored more than yours. Well, our side censored more than yours. And you start to realize everybody's getting censored in different areas, but there's a common base point where if you just get in the spectrum of it, they're like, we'll leave you here. And then it seems like now it's unfair game when it's really kind of fair across the board.
Mm.
I said a lot. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't really know what to say to that in all honesty because yeah, I'm not really I'm not really versed in like the kind of the way that censorship is working in terms of like the online sphere so much.
Well, for
I
instance, like if you put out an article,
hmm,
people will see that headline rather than the retraction that might come out 4 days later. Which kind of with a
yeah,
pamphlet, it's a little bit different. You have to print a retraction
oh
if you
yeah,
work at a newspaper. It's a lot more people are going to
yeah.
see that,
So
but online is so difficult.
yeah, the pamphlets are more independent sort of medium, especially. I mean, for hundreds of years, it was basically produced by individuals, and they could basically say whatever they want. And I mean, you might get locked up for it if someone powerful doesn't like what you're saying, but you don't really have to print retractions or anything. They're a lot more independent as a medium than a newspaper, for example, through a company. But again, in terms of my expertise, like it was, there was never there was never anybody on the right arrested for distributing pamphlets in the US in terms of the interwar period at the very least. Um, this was entirely an attack on people on the left. It gets more complicated into the 30s and 40s when there was members of the left who teamed up basically with the government to attack other members of the left. That's a whole other thing. But in terms of today, I mean, my general feeling, I mean, it just kind of seems like a bit of a replay of these things, but through the discourse of America, the internet, and but it's I think it's a more difficult thing because I don't think the difference. I think the dominant political strain at the moment, or at least the one that is the most powerful, is liberalism, and I think liberalism generally will resort to the right rather than teaming up with the left. And yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to sort of think about
Well, it's hard not to get sucked into like a weird rabbit hole in this type of
Yeah.
discussion because anything with politics, it's like you got to tread lightly. I literally I hate every political party. I mean, not like I don't hate the people involved in it. I just don't like how everyone's so confined to one side to not look at the other person's thing. And I mean,
Mm,
I could be classified. I'm probably classified as a libertarian.
right.
But I don't like that. I don't like being put into a block category so that I get mad at that too. Um, but I just watching like the truth, like I don't care whose side, whose narrative, who's what, who's that. I'll follow whoever, like Trump, Biden. I don't care. I'll poke fun of them all. But
Hmm.
when the truth is starting to be kind of blended into a line where people don't know what to believe in anymore, I mean, I've probably been like the biggest voice about saying that Fauci was lying about the gain of function thing. Just yesterday, The Intercept posted more articles where now it was supposed to be Monday. Now it looks like it's going to be Wednesday when we're recording this. And he's going to have to answer for the fact that, yeah, he did lie and he's going to talk about it. I don't know, but it makes it so confusing where the next, me saying that people get upset. And then we're entering back to what it was back in the day when they were when they were printing political posters and saying,
Mm,
oh, don't do this because this is what everyone over there looks like, or this is what that. I mean, Bugs Bunny used to make fun of Asian people because they had the giant bowl cut hair, the giant
hmm.
thick eyebrows. That was a giant political cartoon of propaganda that they did during the war back then.
Hmm.
And they put that on
Hmm.
posters everywhere. It's this, we're way past that. Yet we still seem like we're still in the same thing. And it's not just here, it's Australia. It's every single person that's going through the same political BS, which I'm like, why is everyone so focused on it? It's because they are locked inside their house. And to be 100% honest, it's like the best reality television show you will ever see. I mean, when North Korea, the dictator, whoever Kim Jong-un steps down and they invite the sister in there while he's sick, it's like you got the evil sister coming out of nowhere. It's the
Mm,
best reality television show, which keeps making you want to watch the next episode, the next season, and you're hooked.
mm, mm. Yeah.
We're in a weird rabbit
I'm
hole
I'm
again. I'm
really
sorry.
sorry, Robbie. I feel no. I'm really sorry. I think I came into this sort of expecting something else. I don't know. I think I came into this podcast thinking it was from a more left perspective. I'm that's not
I'm
to
not right either, by the way.
no, I know.
Oh.
I know you're not into the labels and stuff, but I kind of struggle to sort of get very engaged with this kind of discussion.
Well, I'm just trying to get your thoughts on a concept of like, do you think that is it anything different? Or is like for your research, for instance, are you seeing any similarities or any common differences that are helping you decide or be able to decipher your own thoughts in a way on a sense of like what's going on today? I'm not trying to have you analyze today's events. I'm just trying to find is this something that's brand spanking new? Does that mean I can blame technology for the factor of how it's
No.
gotten like this? Or is this something that's always happened? It seems like it's probably something that's always happened. It's just I don't understand where people can get to a point where I don't know, they rather just find what they're already thinking and run with it rather than just want the truth. Like I feel like half of these court cases that come out there, whether it's Chauvin, whether it's whoever, people want to watch it and people want justice and people want truth, but it's like you start watching how people lie in court cases or blend narratives or do these types of things. I'm not for that. Maybe I got us in a weird rabbit hole in that, but I'm just trying to look
No.
for if this is something in the past that isn't, you know.
I get what you're getting at. I think that the idea that technology is to blame, that the internet's to blame for any problems in society, I think is wrong. I think definitely as a historian, not just in my period, but in a lot of periods that you look at, if you look at like what people have said, I think it's very obvious that people felt very similar. Like, what's wrong with the world? Like, I mean, if you live through 2 world wars, you're probably feeling fairly similar to how we feel living through COVID. And I mean, not in the sort of going off to war sort of feeling, but the sort of feeling of what the hell's going on? Like, and I think it's a consequence of what happens under capitalism. And I think this is where we are going to diverge, because I think the problem with me here is that I view things. I view the history of our society, and I view how we got here now in a sort of in a Marxist way. And I believe that fundamentally the problem is capitalism and
Yeah.
the way that the mode of production. And I believe that's why we're in this position. So I feel as though if I wouldn't really agree that there's like this kind of middle ground that we can all reach. I think that I don't mean to say that people can't be won over at all, but I do believe that there will be under this system there is an attempt to purposely mislead people about the facts, and
I agree.
I
Yeah.
think that's why we're here, because the capitalism needs to sustain itself, and these lies need to be purported to make people believe in the system and believe that there is no other alternative.
It's not a fair system. It's definitely feels like it's rigged in a lot of ways. This is where I start to like question, because I always look at older history to try and see if it's like something new that we're experiencing. And I mean, I would like to think that it's technology, but I don't. I guess it's probably not. It's probably the same thing that's been going on, but it's definitely like, for instance, my example was during this pandemic, for the longest time, even before, they talked about be your own self entrepreneur. You can do it. It's
Hmm.
easy. Just start up your own business. All these ads for doing this. And then people did it and they failed. And then they
Hmm.
went and they were like, well, I guess it wasn't for me. Necessarily, it might not have been you. You might have just been pitch something and they don't really follow through with how they pitched it. It's a corporate
Yeah,
owned
yeah,
thing. You're going against what? I have hot sauce friends that are talking about how hard it is for them to get a patent on their sauce. And it's like, yeah, because the market's owned. Everything's already owned already. They're
yeah.
telling you can do it. And then when you fail, you feel like you're less. And then you
Oh
won't
yeah,
ever do it
the
again.
implication is like it's a personal failing if you
Yeah.
don't do well on the capitalism. Yeah, even though yeah it is rigged, and even if you do well, you might end up getting taken over by a bigger company or like outdone and go bankrupt anyway. It's not at all about a personal failing. Well, it can be, but but it's I think the problem is, and I think it's one of the things that makes people feel well induces kind of mental health issues is that
Yeah.
like whenever somebody doesn't succeed under capitalism, it can only be viewed as a personal failing rather than someone someone with access to far more money had far more opportunity than you. Yeah, absolutely, I think that's where that sort of thing links up with mental health. And I definitely think as well the pandemic showed that as well. Just the kind of so many people have lost their jobs and stuff, and we know it's because of the pandemic, but you still lost your job, you still lost your meaning, like it's still your livelihood, but you're supposed to improve yourself. You know what I mean? Capitalism says that you've got to go and get a better job, or like there's this kind of new sort of um young people love to like what's it called, like grind set and shit like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like yeah.
Hustle and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, like side hustles and shit, and it's kind of um it's kind of makes out that if it doesn't work out for you, then you're shit.
Yeah.
And I think and this has been, but this isn't new either, like people like I mean people have been subject to the whims of the economy for
It's an
centuries.
elite
And
class thing. I don't think people really pay attention to that thing. Like it's like a bunch of wealth people that just make it they don't have to worry,
yeah,
and the only time you ever see change is when it starts affecting them. And I think people like really get divided on like a race issue when I go, I think it's just a poverty issue, to be 100% honest with you. I'm sure there's racial issues out there. Nobody's saying that there's not. But there's a wealth class thing when it comes to just
hmm,
poor people not being able to, they're trying to cut out that middle class, and they're really trying to make it super poor or just super rich, because I see people
yeah.
that somehow boost through stats or get billions of dollars. NFTs, for instance, is the best example. What is that? I have AI created art that will make anything better than I could ever think of or ever create. And I could
Hmm.
sell it for $3 billion, however many dollars. But then a painting that someone spends days upon months making in their basement gets $10, and maybe someone puts it in their bathroom. So whenever they go to the bathroom, they can look at it for 5 seconds and walk out. It's just really,
Hmm.
really strange what they choose to let succeed, which seems to be the laziest option. But in a sense, I don't know, maybe I'm just not talented enough to succeed. I don't know, but that's how they flip it around, where you start realizing that it's like a set boundary things. And when you pop out of that peg position, or you pop out whatever slot you're in, the narrative tries its best to shove you back in. And if you won't go back in, it has to exclude you out. I've seen that with so many of my friends, where that's where
Mm.
you can get into ideas of pandemic. That's why they're buying up all the small mom and pops. I have no clue. But I mean, it's not far from off. I don't expect any of these people, from any politicians, from anybody, to be my mommy or daddy like a lot of people want them to be, to
Hmm.
have every single answer. What I find is weird is that, like, somehow all of a sudden we just started trusting big pharma, like they're out there for your best interest. I'm like, can anybody recommend eating an apple, or like getting healthy, or doing any of these types of things? I haven't seen any of that in the past 36, 37 months, where I start going like, I'm not saying be a rebel or do any of these things. All I'm saying is think, question. Like,
Mm.
the only person who's going to care about you is going to be you and your family, the people who actually know you. You can't care about people that don't know you. That's why we have like McDonald's corporations.
Absolutely. Although I do disagree in the sense, ideally, I do believe that um, this is not the case now, clearly, but I believe that as a community, there's many examples of communities looking after each other, and I think in a better society we would look after each other regardless of if we were family or not. But clearly, corporations don't have our best interests in mind. Um, Going back to kind of what you were saying about NFTs, like I just sort of feel like that, yeah, there's just sort of so many cases of actually people who can invest in these sorts of things are already rich anyway. And also the fact that they're doing nothing. There's all this talk about working hard and succeeding, but actually the people with most money basically don't do anything. There's no
Yeah.
correlation between hard work and the amount of money you have.
There's
There
like a
might be,
ceiling that once you
yeah,
burst through that ceiling, it's easy. Like, it should be the opposite, where if you don't have money, it should be easier for you to get money. But then if you have money, it should be harder. But it's the opposite way around. Once you have a lot of money, it's easier to just do
yeah,
nothing and
just
get more
yeah,
money. Like,
yeah, just accumulate. It's even like even on this a small scale. I mean, people sort of float around in sort of different universes. Like even if I think about here in Britain, like we have members of parliament make 80,000 grand, sorry, 80 grand a year plus expenses and plus loads of free stuff from companies and stuff. And to 80 grand in pounds to us is a lot of money. The average wage in the UK is, I think, about 20 grand a year. So it's 4 times the normal wage. And my feeling about this is like it's so much money, and these people get more, like get expensive. The higher up you get, the more free stuff you get. Does that make sense?
yeah,
It's like and that's not even like
it
millionaires,
it shouldn't
right?
be
But we're
that way
talking
though.
about such a divide between people who are like making laws and people who are actually just trying to work hard. Um, and yeah, it's very much the higher up you get, the more free stuff you get, the more money you can accumulate. And if you manage to break into that, whatever, but it's actually statistically rare that people go from rags to riches.
Yeah.
So
What start I know the British Library dropped this kind of research thing into your lap, but what really kind of opened up your mind to, or at least to make you think differently? Do you have a point where you started thinking differently? Because I think probably my first year doing this show, I just started thinking about more things differently. Like, I never even would have thought an Epstein thing. Like, I would have been like, he's gonna get justice. No, you tie to enough people, you start realizing how many people have dirty corruption tied to their business suits, and it gets a little bit freaky, where I started questioning more. And I think you get that way through kind of examining more, doing your own kind of looking through and research, not really looking at a tweet, but actually
Mm,
reading a full story or seeing a documentary, whatever you have to do to really kind of focus in or hone in whatever one specific thing. And you start extending it to like, oh, this could be all things.
mm. I it, I would say I was probably like a teenager when I was sort of started coming around to like realizing that things didn't have to be the way they are.
Wait, hold on. How old are you?
I'm 30
No
now.
shit. No, 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 no.
Yeah.
I thought you were like 24 like me.
Oh, thanks.
You look young.
No, no, I literally just turned 30. It's like I'm miserable. Um, um, no, no, I was a teenager, and I do have a very quite clear memory of just I don't know where I was or what I was doing, but it suddenly dawned on me. I think I was thinking something about cash machines, and I was like, I was sort of started to think who runs the cash machines and why do like where does the money go? A really weird sort of thing to think about. I was probably like 12, and there was like this part of me that kind of realized I was like everything that we kind of live through is it's all man made. There's no reason certain things have to be a certain way. It was very sort of how would you say, like primitive kind of interpretation of things, but like yeah, I just kind of I was also brought up with a very liberal family, so that probably sort of took me in one direction anyway. But I do remember actually feeling like, oh, hang on, this isn't sort of a natural status of things. Although I guess there's some people who would have you believe that capitalism is the natural order, but I really didn't feel that way.
Yeah, it didn't have to be, I think, but I think that was way we missed the boat on that one of when that was going on. That was definitely an industrial era type move, which honestly scares me now because if we go to how fast technology is going, the whole wage thing of people getting paid like 18 an hour, it all of it incentivizes is these corporations to have more power over you because they'll hire anybody to take a job for 18 an hour, which then you
Mhm,
lose power. And then if you pay people too little, you don't have work ethic. People don't want to work for a job that they don't care about. I think there should be more options for you to be able to pursue the things that you want to pursue if you actually are
mhm,
passionate about the things you want to pursue. For instance, I talk to a shit ton of people. I should definitely like I went to school for psychology, but I didn't get a
mhm,
master's in it. I just went for, like a associate's degree and I was like, nope, wiping my hands with schooling, done with that because it just wasn't for me. But through my work ethic, you would think I'd be able to at least get an option or an avenue to try talking to people and hopefully
mm,
have that conversational thing. But that doesn't account that's nothing. No, you need a master's degree to be able to be a psychologist or any of these types of things. I'm like, well, you're not given a lot of people out there who I know would be fit, good animators, people that make
yeah,
amazing designs, people who are passionate about the craft, but you want to hire the person who has the research or the experience. And that's not discrediting people with PhDs or anything. That's just saying that some people didn't have that option. I know plenty of people that had to leave their whatever high school or drop out of college, whatever, so they could raise their family because maybe someone in
mm,
their family had died. I know a couple
mm,
friends who had to do that, and then they went to a trade school. I just think you should get the options that you want to do in life, especially if you want to be whatever. You should be able to have that opportunity or at least get a shot for it, but that's not how it works. I work, you can't work two jobs and then come home and then sleep and then do the same thing over and over again. That's not a
mhm,
life to
mhm.
live.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, there's two things about that in terms of there's this capitalism requires a reserve army of labor, but we technically live. Our society could definitely basically function and give everybody a job where they worked less, were paid an adequate amount, and could have free time to do whatever they want, read, do artistic pursuits, whatever. There's plenty of jobs, and too many people. But they need the reserve army of labour, i.e., unemployed people or people who need work, aren't employed enough, only on part-time or 0-hour contracts. They need these people to be on reserve for when the economy fluctuates, right?
Mhm.
Um, so basically what I'm saying is there is kind of the reason we can't have that free time. There is the capacity for us to work less and enjoy life more, but we are not being allowed it. And it means that other people, so it means that some of us work way too much and some of us
Yeah.
can't get employed at all. And that's just how it works. But I think it is possible that we can all work less and enjoy life more, but still provide services to society.
You should be able to afford your own home and afford your standard of living. And you also shouldn't come home and be a foreigner in your own house. There are plenty of people out there who have kids who have really never seen their parents because their parents are working all the time.
Mm,
And just from my own experience of knowing what that was like, of not really just kind of fending off for yourself at your house, you kind of understand the crucial steps of what that is. And that is a factor of it's the cost of living right now, especially in my town. It's two
yeah,
grand a month for a studio apartment. That's you're no 24-year-old, no 20 whoever kid is doing that. You wonder why you have millennials living at their parents' house until they're in their 30s, is because the
yeah,
market is shit and you don't give them the opportunity to afford a house or be able to do the things that their parents did. So then they have their parents yelling at them, and then next thing you know, you see, my parents don't understand me. Well, you're just a lazy kid. It's not you guys. It's there's a
yeah,
whole entire world out there that's running in a way of there's people that are running it who are already safe. They don't care about you. And that's where we start getting into an issue where, I mean, if we could all sit and love each other and, be able to share and not have to worry about expenses, death, tax, bills, and all that, that's a perfect thing. I just think we missed that timeline of whatever that is.
mm. I think
You could disagree with me. It's
yeah,
okay.
no,
I'm
no,
not
no,
going to
no, I
get
agree.
mad.
No, it's fine. No, I'm just trying to formulate my thoughts really. But I think it's certainly not an easy thing to implement. To get to a part where we're all loving each other and stuff, all that sort of shit. Um but yeah, I mean, it's again, it goes to this sort of mental health thing, what you said about like sort of millennials living with their parents and stuff. It's so common. It's same here in the UK as well. Um, it's it flies in the face of what we grew up thinking, especially sort of my generation. We kind of were told if you work hard at school, you'll do well and you'll get a nice house and you'll have kids, and this kind of like very sort of stereotypical upbringing. And I think a lot of people our age kind of realize that they've done their best. Everyone feels like they've worked hard, like comparatively. People like to blame other people, say, oh, I've worked harder than them. But everyone feels internally that they've worked hard for themselves in whatever way. And they've done that, and they've got to a point where they can only afford at best to rent a house with maybe 2, 3 other people, or live with their parents. Either way, they feel like they're not making progress, because living with your parents, while you're supposed to move out when you turned 18 at the very latest, um, or living with people, you're supposed to be forming a family, right? Um, in the ideal world, in this sort of capitalist sort of morality. And I think there's just this constant feeling for people, where they're not living how they expected to live, and that can really sort of pull on you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and
Well,
what was the
I experienced that recently when I hit 1,000 episodes. That was it for the show. I was done.
mm,
And then I got a lot of messages to come back, and I kind of wanted to because I enjoy talking to people like yourself. And
mm,
I was like, I took my shot and it failed. That's fine. And people are like, what do you mean you took your shot and it failed? Like, it obviously didn't work out if I did 1,000 episodes and didn't get the attention that I wanted to get from it. It's like, yeah, but are you getting the satisfaction from it? It's like, yeah, but satisfaction does not pay the bills. This
mm,
is 100% free, and still trying to balance that out with a job. It's like, you just really only thing I want in this world for everybody. And I'm pretty sure you probably share the same view as me on this, is just to be able to smile and not have to worry. I mean, there's a lot of people that have a dark cloud in the back of their head, and it gets to a point where you just don't feel like it's ever going to go away. And it's like
Mm,
that's a really tough pill to swallow. And I think that's the factor of not people, it's the world. The world
mm,
makes people into shit. The world makes
mhm.
people upset and mad on Twitter where they're ranting back and forth. That's a world thing, is because you got a narrative that's out there, and it's sadly not everyone agrees with the same exact point. And I don't want them to. I think we all have individual thoughts for a reason, but it should never, never be a struggle to survive. And it is
No.
100% a struggle to survive in any country that you live in. It is freaking nuts how we've let this go on for so long.
I mean, particularly, I mean, going back to sort of, if I'm thinking about America, particularly in terms of like, I mean, you guys, you guys like have to pay for healthcare. Like that's probably quite a controversial thing, maybe to talk about. I
I
don't know, but
used to
like,
think free healthcare was good, and then I actually experienced the bad side of what that is. I took John Hopkins, that respected medical school, to court, and I won because they it was free. They were like, "We're giving you free health insurance." I'm like, "Yeah, but I did everything you asked, and you never gave me the medication I was supposed to get." And they kept throwing me under paperwork until eventually the judge was like, "Oh, they're doing what they always do and run you through the system is because it's free." And I was like,
so
"That's an issue."
what? So hang on. So this was about healthcare rather than the actual. Sorry, about insurance rather than the actual healthcare. Sorry, I'm trying to understand.
It was through my insurance provider. It was just the freest one they had. So I was
Right.
using the only good part really, I guess, about the insurance that I'm on is that if you go to the emergency room, there's like no really anything but like small little copay. But that
Yeah.
also, you're on the bottom of the list when it comes to anything to deal with that company. And that little company that I am under is connected to John Hopkins. Like when I took him to court, I was expecting like a Zoom call, and it was just going to be me, no lawyer. And I'm sitting there with the judge, and he's like, "You didn't bring a lawyer?" I was like, "Why would I? It's Priority Partners." And he goes, "Bro, you're going against John Hopkins." And I was like, What? I should have got a lawyer for that. Like that's a respected organization."
So this is, I think, kind of a misunderstanding of the
Oh God.
notion of universal healthcare in terms of, I mean, because I can barely understand this situation because it involves insurance and things like that. Like, I don't think anything involving insurance has anything to do with universal healthcare, and I think that's where the narrative in America about healthcare has gone. Is very strange because it seems even on the left there's kind of no discussion when we talk about free healthcare in America. I feel like a lot of people still invoke the idea of using insurance. I mean, here we literally just pay through our taxes and the services provided, albeit that's not to say it's perfect because we have over the past 20 years been going through a privatization process where certain bits of our health service have been sold off. So now we have to pay for certain things like prescriptions. We have to pay for our dental care. And all that sort of thing, which to us is bad. But like, I guess to you guys, it's like no surprise. But a universal healthcare is about it being publicly owned, and you go to the hospital, and there is no discussion of payment or anything like that.
Oh, I like
That
that.
is universal.
But doesn't that
that's
lead
that's
into
that's
Canada though, where people from Canada who have free healthcare, they still come here if they have a broken leg or something, because it's like a 6 month wait to get something fixed like that.
Yeah, and absolutely. And this is it's a similar thing in the UK. You have people who uh, end up paying for private. We do have private providers, and you can basically skip the queue and go to a private provider if you want. But this is a consequence of the one of the things that the government is currently doing and has been doing is grinding down the public services. One of the things that governments really like to do to get things to be privatized is to make public services look like shit and act like shit. So they've sold off parts of it, and other parts are underfunded, and slowly waiting lists get longer, services aren't provided, and people start to think, oh, I don't like this public service, they should sell it off. And that's how you get public consent. um And no one is to benefit from private companies owning healthcare. Plenty of Americans have experienced that. There is a problem when people can't afford to get cancer treatment and basically have the choice between crippling debt and death. And this is kind of the NHS in the UK is a very sort of, it's a hard thing to grind down because it's a very beloved institution. People appreciate that if they get sick, they know that they will be looked after, that they won't have to go into debt, that they won't have to like not feed their kids because they need to get healthcare. However, as I say, if they can grind the service down enough, they manufacture consent to sell it off, rather
Oh
than doing
shit.
it through the black door, the back door, because they're doing plenty of selling off anyway. It's been on the news. We before the election, it was very obvious that there were very clear files that the Conservative government here was selling off the NHS bit by bit, but nobody sort of cared. And it just happens because people are kind of like, oh, okay, and it'll be gone, and we'll be in a similar situation as the US. And people don't really want that, but it's that people aren't being given information. And it goes back to what we were talking about right at the beginning of the podcast, in that information, especially in the UK, we have a terrible journalistic system here, who are basically client journalists for the state. And people aren't getting the full picture. People aren't being told very important information about the government, about what's going on. And this is what happens. So going back to your original point, though, is I think you are actually in favor of universal healthcare, but I think the way that it's discussed in America can be a confusing thing
Probably.
because
I feel like I learned something a second ago.
God.
I think going back to the like the independent journalist thing, especially over there in the UK, I think there's not really any, I guess, achievement or any praise you get for doing those types of things and sticking your neck out. And there's more of a punishment for when you do. Josh Rogan is probably a very vocal, I would say, very vocal anti-CCP government, which opened up my eyes to the whole entire CCP institutions of just their horrible things that happen over there, which will come here. I mean, social credit score, whatever they had over there, is dangerous, and it was leading over here for a little while. But Josh Rogan's a Washington Post writer who's not,
Right.
I mean, I'm not a big fan of the Washington Post, but he's a good dude, at least from what I can tell. He's tied in with Naomi Park, who's the North Korean defector. When he writes stuff, he talks about it. He goes, I don't get anything out of this. Like what? I get it, something article published. I get a news piece on CNN or whatever. I get to talk on there and answer to every question they want, though. He goes, I stick my neck out. He goes, that's the issue that you have with independent journalism, is that there's not really an incentive to go and get after these things for the right or for the appraise that you're doing the right thing. That's cool and all, but they can take everything from you in some aspects. Those people can shun you and blacklist you off anything. It's kind of like how Russell Brand has gone
Mm,
completely the opposite way from what he used to be. Like he's now a political commentator that people always talk about and look to him. I was like, I mean, he's sticking his neck out to lose all of his stuff. He can get deplatformed in a second. We don't have anybody that's doing that because you're not incentivizing people to do that. There's a
mm,
system set up that if you try and go against the narrative, if you try and say something that might be bad, for instance, no one's talking about the Speaker of the House who talked about insider trading. She's like, I don't think we need to ban Congress people from doing insider trading. It's like, because you're worth $200 million and you got half your stuff in your husband's name. Like, what
mhm,
are we talking about? It's like a movie. And I don't know if that is maybe on something that might just be wrong or whatever. But I start
mm.
looking at like you want real information. I like that Twitter has certain accounts that are people that are actually trying to call out and let people know this is going on and nobody's paying attention to it. I think that's important, but they get banned and they lose everything that they build because it doesn't fit their narrative. And I'm like, you're not incentivizing people to go and try and do the Peter Parker journalism. Like you're not,
Oh no,
yeah, there's none of that.
no. It's yeah, I mean, as I say, I'm not up to speed with sort of current American journalists journalism shit, but I think you guys are probably doing better overall than us in that
What?
regard, because we really genuinely we have a serious issue in the UK in terms of basically in terms of journalistic freedom, because um essentially all the mainstream journalists now are basically work for the government. They not directly, but they basically are puppets. They basically regurgitate what the government says. We literally have like particularly the BBC, very well regarded institution globally, but the respect for journalists in the UK is absolutely like bottom of the barrel. In fact, there was a survey, and it compared like how much people trust the media and how much people trust journalists in different countries. And I think it was Europe wide, and most countries were maybe like 60, 70. Like UK was like right at the bottom here with about 15% or something like that. We're absolutely like, we've got no reliable media. I mean, I think I wouldn't even, I'm at the point now where I don't even really read newspapers. I don't really read news online about the UK, because there's not really anywhere that's particularly reliable. And you even have like the head of politics. I think she's resigned now, or not resigned. She's retiring or moving on to new pastures. But there's kind of a direct line between people who have worked on like politics at the BBC who go to work for the Conservative government. In fact, we had sort of, I don't know if you guys heard about this at all, but there was this whole thing, and it's still going on. There was a new one recently, but basically during our lockdowns, the government and people who worked in the government were having parties, like face-to-face parties,
Yeah,
big parties.
Boris Johnson was
Um,
one of them.
yeah. So there's this new one come out, I think yesterday as well, that Boris Johnson and his wife are at. It's no surprise, really. Everyone knew, like, the rules don't apply to that tier of person, right? But
It's a double
what was that?
standard. You got to have
Yeah,
like what's like if you're making a rule for all of us, you got to follow them. It's like we had I don't know if it was the mayor of New York or California, the governor of California. Oh God, I keep blanking on it. They were caught at a pizza place or whatever it was, and then there was a guy who took a trip. He vacationed, and you weren't supposed to travel at all during this lockdown thing. He had a
yeah.
green screen up
Oh,
behind him, and they had a chandelier. It's like if you're
I think
outside,
I
how
heard
is there a
about this.
chandelier? It's it. That's what I start getting a little bit upset with, which
Yeah.
is like it's you can't. You're not the god of the system. We aren't just toddlers that you can walk around and they think that they can
Well,
because they do.
yeah, well, definitely. And it's not just in those cases, it's because they live lives where they are exceptions to the rule, that like they can get away with things that normal people can't get away with. Even if you think about like people, well, again, this is, I'm sure, the same in the US, but we have very obvious cases that there is prolific cocaine usage in the halls of parliament, right, by MPs. Yet we have people who will go to jail for years for drug use and distribution of drugs. So, I mean, they live lives where they just don't, the rules simply don't apply. So why would the COVID rules apply to them either?
See,
But my
that's what it
point,
gets. That's gets where it gets an issue because that we had Biden's son, who was the Hunter laptop thing that
yeah,
happened. That happened, but a year before that, or not a year before that, a couple months before that, Biden made a lesser sentence if you're caught using crack cocaine than if you use just a certain type of crack. And it's like because his son was caught later with that crack that got a lesser sentence for. So it was like
yeah,
weird kind of manipulational tactics. And the fact that you couldn't find that and they blocked that narrative because they wanted Trump out of office so bad. I'm like, look, I don't care how much you hate the guy, but you can't just block information like that. That was in the
yeah.
state next to me where I was like, wait, it exists. People are like, that's a conspiracy. I'm like, like, what?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, no, I mean, and it even goes down to kind of a sort of more sort of lower down level. And if you think about in terms of like all the people in the US who are currently in jail for drugs charges or even just weed, and now you have this legalization of weed and like you can actually distribute and sell weed under certain circumstances now in the US, as I understand it. But these people are still in jail for doing
Yeah.
essentially the same thing. Largely Black people. This is a difference, I guess, racially, in terms of you have Black people who go into jail for certain crimes like drug dealing and whatnot. But as soon as like middle class white people start to do it, it's okay. There's this dividing line between what's acceptable depending on who's doing it.
There is a narrative out there that a lot of people like to tweet about, saying that there is a large group of, or whoever, certain of ethnicity that goes to jail. It's if a white person, if I sold a certain amount, and then it all depends on who the judge is. I mean, I know two friends of mine did the same crime years apart, different judges, different sentences. It goes down to that aspect, but a lot of people like this race narrative, and the news plays the race narrative a lot. I don't think it's that at all. I think it just depends on what day you catch that person. There's plenty of people who are spending life in prison for a sale of weed, and that are white old people that look like they probably do more than
Absolutely.
weed. But
That's not that. This isn't to say that there is not. Um, there is anecdotal things. There are individual cases. There are exceptions that prove the rule. So there is a very disproportionate amount of Black people in jail in America
oh yeah,
than white people,
yeah.
and it's no accident. It's not just luck of who they got the judge. There's a process that a racist system has processes that people don't even necessarily do consciously. But there was the policeman that arrested them. There was the jury that indicted them. There was the judge that was harsher than the other judge. But they all have these biases, and this is not to say, again, I agree with what you said earlier, that it's not just race. I think there is a massive class thing. In fact, I don't even think they're separate. I think race and class are very much intertwined. So absolutely, of course, you get white people who are going to jail for distributing drugs. But that's not to say, that doesn't prove that there is not a bias in the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I also think it's a concept if you might have that same exact outcome of a certain ethnicity in jail over another is also because the areas that they live in. I mean,
But
ghettos, for
why did they live
instance,
in, yeah, exactly. But why did they
they
live in these
created the
areas?
ghettos.
I don't think that's
The
true.
government created the ghettos.
Oh, the government did. Yes, sorry. I
Yeah.
thought you were
Well, no,
saying that
what?
Black people created the
No.
ghettos. I was like,
The government created
no,
certain areas, especially by doing
absolutely.
blockbusting
Yeah.
as well too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. So absolutely. And again, that's a class thing. But that's part of the process that ends up meaning that these people get prosecuted more. Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
I get what you're saying. I think we're probably saying the same thing. I just don't think it's
Yeah, no,
using
no,
the same
absolutely.
words. Um,
Yeah.
I it's so hard because that's always the issue that always gets brought up. And I want people to have rights for everything that you have. But if I explain to you, like I had to heat my house at a point with my oven before, a lot of people don't know what that experience is like. And then I've also been told like, oh, that's coming. That's like a Black childhood. It's like, what? No, that's just a poverty issue as well
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
I
Oh,
think
absolutely. Yeah,
people
yeah.
draw lines to things with necessarily blaming it on a certain issue, and not to blame it on one thing and say this is the issue as well too. I mean, it's just so hard because you get talking about these topics, much like we were talking about in the beginning. You didn't think it was going to go this way. It's so hard because if this does get brought up, it's like weird, like stepping on eggshells when you talk rather than expressing your opinion. If there are more people like yourself or more people like how I've been, where we're just chatting back and forth, there's no
Mm,
like, well, you're wrong in this or you're wrong in that. It's discourse. You're never going to
mm,
solve issues if you don't have public discourse about these things. And a lot of the general public doesn't really want that because that block button is so tempting to hit. And
yeah.
it's like, that's not what you can do. What you can do is you can talk to people. You can understand each other's thoughts and opinions and emotions. Necessarily, you don't have to put yourself into a certain position or I can't understand that because of this. You just talk about these types of things and you
Mm,
see growth from it. You expect the system to change, but you never talk about the issues involved with the system because you're too afraid to. And that's a corporate issue. They
mhm.
do that shit on purpose.
I think, yeah, it's a point, because so I've got kind of a line, right, in terms of how much discussion am I willing to get into with somebody, right? So, for example, I have family who are probably like quite right wing, right? And I have the classic like grandma who says racist stuff, but I will talk to her, and I feel like people um, do actually value discussion and having and sort of seeing things from different perspectives. I've had really good conversations with family, and I think people can turn around from possibly bigoted views to see things from other perspectives if you talk to them. However, I also, if a Nazi comes into my mentions on Twitter, I'm going to block them. I'm not, I don't think, I think there's a line where you have to, I mean, I don't have the mental or emotional capacity to debate everybody that I come to face with. And I think most people don't. But I don't believe that somebody who wants me dead or wants certain races dead or a certain demographic dead is particularly useful to talk to. I think there's a certain line where, you just have to kind of
Yeah.
at least give yourself the mental health benefit of just blocking and never having to associate with them.
It's those trolls though. Sometimes it's hard to tell if a person actually feels this way or if they're just doing it because they're on the internet and the internet gives like a nameless
Yeah.
face basically. Um I a lot of times you get a message like that, or I see people say something online. I'm like, there's no way you think that. There's no way in hell your head is like that. But people go like, oh, this is what I believe. Trump this, MAGA this, and then they'll put like a Nazi symbol in their profile picture, and I'm like,
Mm.
I can't. I don't. There's no name attached to this. There's no actual.
It'll just end up what you'll end. I mean, whether they're trolls or not, it kind of just feels like you're just going to end up going in circles, and somebody with that kind of outlook is probably not willing to engage anyway. But
That's what I can respect about it is that someone that looks at something like that and just considers it all a joke. The only giant issue or the many issues that fall with that is that you're not helping fix it. You're just being a troll in it. And I get it. If people like, there's two types of people in the world. There's people that want to be left the fuck alone, and there's people that won't leave them the fuck alone. They're back and forth all the time, and I'm like, there's a hefty balance there. There's a really good balance there, but there's
mm,
people that are so mad at everything that they just want to stick their middle fingers up and say, screw everything. I don't care. I'm on nobody's side. I'm a free for all. I'm going to laugh at it all. Good. I'm glad you're dealing with your mental health right, but you're
mm,
also destroying everybody else's, which isn't good. So that's also something we need to talk about. It's
mm,
like Twitter or all these places shouldn't be giant places for arguments. I mean, the amount of family members that have blocked each other all because they
mm,
don't agree on certain things. I'm like, I was hoping 2022 was going to be shake hands and kind of reunite those relationships because it shouldn't be like this. You should be able to
yeah.
have your discourses, have your thoughts and opinions. Your opinions and thoughts are the most valid because they're the most crucial to who you are or what you think.
Mm,
But don't be like we've talked at the same level, and that's what I really like about people is when they can just talk to me like I'm on their level, but people either want to talk down to other people, and that's when it gets a little
mhm,
bit kind of difficult. I mean, what makes you different than the people that you can complain about up top that run the system is if you're talking down to someone. It's the exact same
mhm,
thing they do.
mhm.
They're disconnected from the ground level. It's kind of like a manager of a restaurant who's worked from the bottom position up to the top. After a couple of years, they don't know what that dishwasher
Yeah.
position's like anymore.
Yeah, definitely. I yeah, I unfortunately don't think it's going to get any better. I feel as though it's that when situations get polarized like this, I don't think it's necessary. It's it's not just in individuals sort of manifest what's going on. It's kind of like I kind of talked about this earlier, but like I think the the polarization, people's opinions on certain things seem to matter so much because they're about how people view the world. We can have opinions about what our favorite chocolate is and disagree and probably be okay with it. But people who's maybe support Trump, for example, and then someone who supports Biden, that's not to say I'm of that binary choice, but I can see why they both see each other as such opposite forces, whereas I would say they're probably more on the same side, but that's another story.
It's because if I did this, then my views start to change. That's what it is. It's all it is a freaking color. The fact that they pick red versus blue and they do that stupid stuff. I'm like, what are we? I get it. Is it cool because it's good on TV? I have no clue. But that already puts you at such polarizing sides from the start just by the looks of it. He's got a blue tie. He's got a red tie. You know where they sit now. It's like, what? Maybe he just liked it because it brought out his eyes. I don't know. But that's kind of how this whole thing goes. And I don't think that even if politics went away, I think it would just boil down to another thing. I guarantee you there'll be someone that'll listen to this episode who's a friend of yours or a fan of yours, and they'll be like, this kid said this and this kid said that. He was totally wrong on this. Because they agree with you, because they like you. And you should have those support people. You should have those too. But I think people can't boil past the fact that it's not a right and wrong situation. It's just a discussion. But that'll happen. And that'll be with anything. Like you said, chocolate. People want to find a thing to banter back and forth and agree this side's better or this side's better. I do it sometimes when I see someone that says black licorice is terrible. I fucking hate candy in general, but I'm like, I want to say black licorice is awesome just because there's that little like combativeness. But now it's gotten so toxic where you can't ever step past that, and it ends relationships and it causes sometimes in some cases violence.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think that some debates that people get angry about are worth having. However, I don't think that I like to believe that there's this kind of middle ground that we can all meet and sort of get along and kind of say, you know what, we can all have our different opinions. But when some people's opinions are about the humanity of someone else, then that's when things get iffy, and that's when things turn sort of nasty, because no one, I mean, for example, if I'm debating whether well, I don't want to get into any sort of debate, but I think when we're talking about people who are being discriminated against, I think there will be a problem. A lot of debates that get nasty are about discrimination against certain demographics, and I think we should probably not be happy when people say that some people deserve more rights than others, for example. I don't think there is a kind of nice middle ground you can necessarily take with somebody who wants to diminish the rights of certain people. And I think this is, it gets kind of complicated, because I think, well, if we think again,
isn't that the point of communism, though? Is the fact that everyone can kind of settle their differences on that aspect of things?
Not really.
Well, I mean,
Because
if we can
in
agree
terms
that
of
people
like,
can work together to, like, communism is that everyone can share and do these types of things and have this kind of balance without having any issues or having to have maybe pay taxes or do these types of stuff. But how can you do that if a person won't acknowledge another person's rights as being the same as their own? It's like a weird kind of.
no, everyone would acknowledge their rights. I think. Are you saying, oh, why can't we? Oh, rights is in like freedom to say anything, right? Freedom of speech,
or just rights when it comes to race or identities or equal opportunities. Because, it was before when you said that you don't think that's not a hard goal to obtain, is that the whole equal thing. But then at the same time, you're also saying now that it's kind of like impossible because there's some people that won't acknowledge the other rights. So it's like a,
well, I mean, there's a case. I mean, at the end of the day, there's people who want to discriminate against other people probably aren't going to accept communism. So
they're
that would
not
be a
going to
whole
survive. That's just the thing.
Well, exactly. So I think
out.
that's kind of, that would kind of have solved itself, so to speak, if communism ever was to be a thing. I don't think like it would be accepted for people to discriminate against race. I think that would be an enshrining part of a system that has dedicated itself to equality and all that.
I just think that takes time. I think 3 years ago or 4 years ago, like the whole transgender thing was just so foreign to everybody. And now it's like, I've even listened to past episodes where I'm like, I don't think like that anymore. Like I think differently. Like
Mm,
you can't say that. You can't do this. And you realize it's just age. Like, people's tweets don't age or these type of things don't age because the time changed. Like you think that, oh, space, for instance, last year, SpaceX,
mm,
Elon Musk creating a rocket that lands, everyone laughed at him. Then like that by his 10th attempt, now he's doing it all the time. And it just seems normal now. Like, oh, he's got his rocket landed again.
and
That's
all his
the
cars
time
blew
thing.
up.
Yeah, well, it's just to make sure that you're the progress or the footsteps that we're taking right now is actually leading us to a beneficial future. And at this point, I think we're just at a standstill. I think there
Mm,
is an equal opportunity for everyone where you have people that might value their rights over someone else's rights. They're not going to last though. Like that stuff gets
yeah.
evolved out. Comedy, for instance, I've talked to comedians who say comedy should never punch down. Comedy can go every direction. It does not matter if it punches up or if it punches down. We prefer if it punches up, sure. But I mean, if you got Sam Kinison talking about whatever starving kids somewhere, if it's funny, you laugh. But if you don't, canceling a comedian doesn't do anything. What happens is that person loses their job. They go home and breed to their kids hate amongst the people that
Mm,
canceled them. That's Bill
I
Burr's joke.
I generally kind of, I mean, it's to say what does cancellation mean? Because there's different kinds of cancellation in
Bill
terms of what
Cosby.
happens to people. Well, jail.
That's
I mean,
always the
that's
example.
very officially cancelled by
That's
going to
a
jail, I guess. But um, is he still in jail?
No,
I'm
he's
not
out
entirely.
now.
Oh, is
And
he
his
out?
his first recording out after like a year and a half of being in jail was "Hey, hey, hey" from
Oh
his
my
show
god.
Fat Albert. And I was like, that guy's a piece of
All
trash.
right. Yeah. I think cancellation. I mean, there's certain degree. I mean, like thingy. What's his name?
Army
The
Hammer.
director do. Oh no, I forgot about Army Hammer.
He tried to eat his
Um,
girlfriend's ribs. We're in a weird world. We're in a weird world.
cancelled though because this is the thing. Like, I feel like no one even knew about that. I mean, no one around there knew about Army Hammer. I just
It
remember
just
reading
went
about that,
away.
thinking like, what?
It
But
just it just went away.
yeah,
I didn't even know he made it the
he's
Arm
a
and Hammer
really
freaking.
rich guy, though.
Yeah,
There
because
might be certain reasons it went
it's
away.
well, it's like a best example, the Epstein thing. The Ghislaine Maxwell trial, if you didn't have problems with the fact that you couldn't view that, that's an issue. Like, I'm surprised the public didn't
Yeah.
raise enough hell about that, but they're like, it's a federal court case. And I'm like, look, this is a little bit bigger than that. And I think the people got to realize that they're stronger than the powers that be. And
Mm,
I don't know. We're not. It's so hard to us to get to unite on something. Everything always gets brought to
yeah.
now the COVID talk, which is weird in its own. I mean, if somebody told you they cured their cancer with orange peels, you would be like, "Oh my god, that's freaking amazing!" But you say you take a certain drug to do the COVID thing, everyone's like, "You didn't take the vax," and they start screaming. I'm like, "Hang on a second, hang on a second. Are we just not going to celebrate that this person's healthy again? Like that's what I care about. That they're not going to freaking die."
Mm. Uh, what were we talking about?
I don't
Sorry,
know.
just completely lost it.
Narratives, everything being switched back and forth, how time flops like that. I don't know.
Well, yeah, no, well, sorry, go. Just this is a complete sort of tangent thing, but because you mentioned Army Hammer, funny, interesting fact about Army Hammer. Is it his granddad or grandpa
Created
was
Arm and
a
Hammer.
member? Yeah. But he was a member of the Communist Party and donated lots of money to the Communist Party as well. Um, yeah,
So let him
fun
eat his
fact.
girlfriend's ribs. I don't care if she agrees to it.
Yeah. It's all right. Yeah, I think so what's his name? The director dude, no, the producer guy who's gone to jail now. What's his name? I forgot his name.
Alec Baldwin.
No, he's not in jail.
Oh,
He had huge like rape and sexual harassment against him. What's his name? What's his name? Uh
do you want me to
I've
look it
forgotten his
up?
name. Yeah.
He's a
He's like, it was like
producer.
a huge thing, like Weinstein. Harvey
Wait.
Weinstein.
Oh, okay. Well, he was tied in with Epstein. I didn't know he was a
But
producer. I just thought he was
yeah, he
famous.
like did movies and shit.
Oh shit.
Um, but he, I mean, he's been cancelled. But I think there's certain amount of sort of bad things a person can do to sort of be like, yeah, most of us are quite okay with him being cancelled.
Yeah.
I think a lot of time, like, so we have a thing here with, I mean, J.K. Rowling everyone's talking about how she's getting cancelled, but she's getting a hell of a lot of attention. Like, she's going, like, there's people going on the news backing her. Like, it's not that when people talk about cancellation, they're just more talking about it. Not in every case, this is not to say for every case, but a lot of the time it's just sort of like people talking back to you, really.
Yeah.
Basically, people saying, a lot of people don't like being told they're wrong, or being told maybe something you did wasn't great. And I think definitely in, like, the case of J.K. Rowling, people are starting to say, what you're saying is kind of bigoted and kind of shit, and a lot of people are losing respect for you. People are allowed to lose respect for people, right?
Yeah.
It's their prerogative. And people don't like what she's saying, and people are treating that as if there's some massive movement to cancel her, but it's just more like people don't like her. And I think there should be, like, this discerning of people are just sometimes shit, and people don't want to sort of watch their shit anymore, or to read their shit. I think
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like there's so much talk about cancel culture, but it's a lot of it's just sort of like, have you actually been cancelled, or are you just like facing criticism? Like, people are allowed to criticize you.
That's see, that's the thing, like the whole thing with Dave Chappelle, for instance. Now, I didn't think his newest special was funny at all. Honestly, it was too much on the
Oh, I
trans.
never watched it, but I heard about
It
it.
was they were saying it's transphobic, but they never brought up any quotes of why it was transphobic, because there really wasn't anything transphobic about it. The only thing he had a joke was about a trans phobic friend of his that ended up killing herself because of the bullying she was getting for defending Dave Chappelle. And they just lost it, and they kept trying to cancel him. I mean, they're still dealing with it now, but it's like that the work should not be taken down. It wasn't
Mm,
funny in the first place. People evolve and they laugh. If a joke doesn't make people laugh, that comedian's going to
yeah.
have to find new material. But I've talked to like female comics who will talk about like a joke should never be thrown punched down. Like Hannibal Buress was the person who opened up that door to getting Bill Cosby arrested. He brought up a joke saying, "Does anybody notice how Bill Cosby just drugs people?" Then they looked into it and they were
Yeah,
like, "Oh
yeah,
my
yeah.
God, it's real." But when he did that joke, they hated him. They were trying to cancel him for a while, boycotting his shows, saying he was punching down at their comedy grandfather. And it was true. I mean,
Can't really punch down at a millionaire celebrity, can you?
he is when he's old, it counts.
Mm,
But that's the weird thing is like I think there's good movements out there that get done a certain way. It just, the whole narrative of like, is it being used in the best of ways? Like for instance, cancel culture, it's just people evolve, people change. You're not giving them the time and the growth to be able to do so. I don't think we live in a society where people just want to walk out into the street and punch people. But in some places, yeah, you do. New York, for instance, is like that. I don't think there's like, for instance, me talking to you, I don't think you have hatred in your heart. I don't have hatred in my heart. I think most people don't have hatred in their heart. If they see a kid on the side of the street, no matter their ethnicity, in the rain or something, they're going to give him a ride home. If he's a small child, they're going to do it because you don't have that hate or that intent for that. I don't know anybody that wouldn't. But I think a
mm,
lot of the times you start researching or you start seeing a whole bunch of one-sided stuff, you start believing that there's just this overwhelming amount of people that hate other people. And I don't know if
mm.
that's necessarily true. Or at least I haven't seen it.
No, I don't think it is true. I fundamentally think that most people, I mean, I know that there's some people that think, oh, humans are terrible, humans are innately selfish and all that sort of jazz. I completely disagree with that. I think it's material conditions that shape people. And I think innately we all want to support each other. I don't think anyone really, as you say, in their hearts, really wants to hurt anybody. However, I think there's the kind of people are compelled by society and sort of the competition in society to outdo people and be selfish. I think we're encouraged to be selfish because that's capitalism. Like
Yeah.
that's what it is. So no, I totally agree that I don't think people are bad, but I think people can be misled. I think people can think solutions are in bad things. I think people see bad in the world and want to work out how to solve it. And I think sometimes people are, well, definitely misfed information. Oh, no, fed misinformation to say misfed. Um, and again, I think, but that's the nature of capitalism, that feeding this kind of belief that we are selfish, so that everyone thinks, well, if everyone else is selfish, then I'm going to be selfish, and it's kind of this sort of circular thing. And yeah, I think it takes a lot to try and break out of it and view things a bit more compassionately, and actually, I don't know. I have a lot of, I probably have a lot more trust in people than other people do, but I think, yeah, I fundamentally don't believe that we are naturally this way. I think there are people that are bad, but not necessarily innately bad.
I would
Does that
say
make sense?
you're probably the personality or the persona that a lot of people should, try and be at times. I mean, you're not overheated on topics. You're not, or at least you haven't been to me. Um, but you speak at a good level of things, even though I can tell with some topics we don't probably think the same on. But I mean, that's not for lack of, we could easily dive into those if you wanted and
Mm.
talk about them. I don't have any stern views to the
Yeah,
point
yeah, yeah.
where I would be so like this and that. I think the only thing is I don't want anybody to feel like they're in a place where they feel worthless than anybody else. Um,
Mm.
but it's an open discussion thing is the whole point of stuff. You might not have thought the podcast was going to go this way. And honestly, I swear to God, if you come back on, I will talk specifically about your area of research. But
No, no,
it
it's fine.
it's that's kind of the important thing is like there's a general consensus of talking about things and being able to understand things with other people, but the powers that be, whoever you want to call it, it's not, they don't create the environment for you to be able to do so. Half the time people come home, they're tired as shit, they don't want to talk about anything, they
Yeah.
get upset easily. When you drive your car, people get upset easily. There's no calm people that drive their cars. It's because the
Oh
environment is set up,
no.
everything around you is set up for you to be the way that you are. And that's a competition thing. That
Yeah, yeah,
person
yeah.
is hustling to their goals. You're not doing enough. Okay. Now
Yeah,
you
yeah.
hate that person instinctually because they're now the prime example of what you should be. I don't have to be anything like that. It's
Mm.
how it's always been. It's your environment that's creating this, not the earth. It's the land that you're in, the town that you're in, whoever that
Yeah.
you're around is creating that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about just the general construction of the world, we've had to cooperate to make things. You can't, everyone knows there's these children's books about how good sharing and cooperating is, but it's true in the sense that nothing gets built if people don't cooperate, right? We have to kind of work together. This sounds very like sort of rounding up the podcast, like we have to work together, guys, but literally, like, I think fundamentally the that is what human nature is a cooperative, we are a cooperative species, but I don't think capitalism brings out the best in us.
I don't agree with capitalism at all. It's just I don't. The issue is you can't. I don't know how to fix it.
I don't
I
think
don't.
anyone does, and I think, like, I appreciate when I talk to people. I tend, actually, I don't really talk about uh, communism or anything like that regularly in my normal life. But it's partially because I think people probably think you're a bit nuts.
Well, it gets
um,
labeled as such. Where like if you even
yeah,
talk about my buddy is a communist, he would share his laptops. But you're just gonna let me borrow this? And he goes, "Yeah, we share things around here." It's so weird, but a lot of people don't. When you say the word communist, is why I said in the beginning, like good communism. You say that, people start going, huh? Good communism.
mm,
It's because communism gets looked at like you're going to be in some Russian regime or Chinese
yeah.
regime and you're going to be like in a camp or
It's
something.
very complicated, and in all honesty, there's a lot of misinformation. The US is great with misinformation. I mean, notoriously with their red scares and whatnot. But yeah, I just think. I can understand that there is a difficulty in conceiving an alternative to capitalism, and I think the best people can do is just kind of try to try to be better and try to conceive that this isn't the way things have to be. Right. I do think part of breaking free of capitalism is like a mental like realization this is not how it has to be. There is not actually a reason that this has to be this way. um yeah.
Kind of back to like the beginning of what we're talking about, like with the research and everything. That this kind of like that door to me saying, does this lead into like political stuff now? That door kind of went that way. I'm wondering if you ever retweet an article or you ever post something that you're working on, do people ever take it a different way and then run with it a certain direction?
um I'm trying to think. Well, actually, this is on quite a different topic. So before I did my PhD, I was actually, so I'm quite new to American history relatively. I was a British historian before this, doing stuff on the interwar period, so the same period. And I did a lot of stuff about Churchill, sort of would you say expose? It was only it was only an undergraduate thesis, but I wrote about how he was quite anti-Semitic and uh, quite a lot of bad things he did in the 1910s, 1920s. Um, and I had somebody, I think I put my article online, someone said, oh, thanks for this. I love Churchill. So I'm really, really pleased to see someone's done research on it. I was like, I don't know if you're going to like this.
Yeah.
um, but you get um, sometimes it's kind of awkward if like you're doing research on somebody and I guess if you I tried to get in touch with a relative of a Conservative member of Parliament from that period, and there's no easy way to sort of say, I'm trying to show what a horrible person your relative was. Yeah, I think it's kind of difficult to convey your work properly sometimes.
It's kind of like Walt Disney was labeled an anti-Semite. And then if you say anything about that, people just light you up. They'll go, don't
Yeah.
even talk about my Disney park creator. I'm like, look, man, you know, you got to understand that this possibility, this might be true. I did one paper on an operation that I think you might find interesting called Operation Cold Feet. And it was about
Mm,
a base that was floating in like the middle of the Arctic. I don't know if it was Antarctica or somewhere, but it was like it was the weirdest thing. Like, you know how when you see a courtroom thing and there's like one person on one side and the other person on the other side, and there's like a dog in the middle, and whoever the dog runs to, this island would keep floating into different areas of territory, and all these people didn't want to trespass onto the other side, so they would sit there and let this ice thing float. Eventually, they put a helicopter and a team
mm.
went down onto the ice base and then got the information out of it and then flew away. I did a paper on it in school, and I did like an episode of the podcast on it when it was there's another
Yeah.
one I used to do. And someone had commented saying, I did a biography on this man and I was there on his dying days before he passed away, and you did a great job on it. Thank you. And I'm like, holy shit, like that's awesome. But that's like kind of like the thing is like, I don't know where I was going with that. Maybe I was just bragging, but this was like 4 years ago. It was just so
Yeah.
interesting where I was like, finally, someone that doesn't comment something of like, because anytime you do anything that's historical or anything
Yeah,
like that,
yeah,
there's always someone who's got to criticize it and be like, you know what, you would do better if you didn't do this or this or this. And I'm like, dude, just listen to the thing or move on. You don't need to do that. People are out here trying to
mhm.
create what they interpret from something.
Yeah, yeah.
You
No,
should look
it's
it up.
I have looked it up,
Mm.
Project for Cold Feet. Yeah, I'm gonna read about it. Um, yeah, I think there is a lot of joy in doing historical research and kind of feeling like you've uncovered something that no one else has uncovered, or like being able to share that information with people. Um, I I get a lot of satisfaction from like bringing new stuff out of the fire, which is why I was excited to work with pamphlets because pamphlets generally people have used them for historical research, but never actually looked at the pamphlet as a medium. So it was quite exciting to sort of sort of uncover what was the point of pamphlets, why were they here, why were they so popular, why are they not popular now, which I didn't really get to touch on so much in my thesis, but I would like to. It's something I kind of struggle with, is doing the kind of people often like to ask, like, so what happened to pamphlets? Like, where are they now? Like, what would you say is like the equivalent to a pamphlet? And
They're
it's
in
such a difficult
museums.
question. Yeah, like they're very rarely used by organizations, and I mean they are used, but I mean we're talking back in the early 20th century, there was circulation of millions around the US. I mean, you're not gonna in your day-to-day life accidentally come across a pamphlet somebody's hidden in a book for you to find
Yeah.
anymore. Like back in those days, it was like quite a prolific thing to hide pamphlets in people's bags and in books in libraries and stuff,
When you
so
said
that they could
where
get the information.
when you said where are pamphlets, I just picture, well, when you go to like a Rite Aid or a pharmacy, they have something that says, "Are you dying?" and you grab it and you
Yeah,
open it up and it tells you all the
exactly.
symptoms and stuff that you
Well,
have.
that's the thing. Yeah, so many people, when they think of pamphlets now, they're not thinking of political pamphlets. They're thinking of information pamphlets, like by either like companies or like health. In fact, not only are they not thinking about pamphlets, they're thinking about brochures. Because there's a difference between a brochure and a pamphlet. And if you think about a brochure is more like public information or like health information or information about a product,
This
right?
Disney cruise. And
Yeah,
then
exactly. So that, but this has never really been discussed in much depth about what is the difference between a pamphlet and a brochure and a leaflet and all that sort of stuff. And it sounds fairly boring, but actually, it shows that there's the pamphlet is a very political object, and it's a very discursive object that a lot of other modes of communication can't convey in the same way. And that's still, as I said earlier, it still remains a problem now where we don't have an equivalent. We can use pamphlets, but are they as useful now? I mean, yeah, I mean, literally the closest thing I could think of an online pamphlet would be like a blog, and it's simply not the same thing.
yeah,
There
well,
is a certain special experience of going through a pamphlet rather than going through a blog. It's very different.
it used to be interesting before the internet when you could actually grab a pamphlet and be like, "Oh, this is interesting facts I didn't know." That's how you got your information. You could get them from
Yeah,
pamphlets
yeah.
or you get them from books or something like that. But now you get if you see a pamphlet, people don't reach for them because they don't want any more shit to carry.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, I'm like that as well. Like I much prefer like reading books on my Kindle. Like I'm one of those people. Like I cannot stand carrying around books anymore. I'm like I like to be as minimalistic as possible. And I think a lot of people, if they did see a pamphlet, they'd be like, this is a waste of paper and my time. Like I could just look this up, or because that, I mean, in theory, the contents of a pamphlet can very easily be like on the website. It can be an article on the website, a long article. They're generally a pamphlet's, I think, about 10,000 words on average. And it just feels like there's a kind of very different experience of how to receive information from a pamphlet left to you, or a pamphlet that you've bought, or a pamphlet that you found, rather than purposely going to a website and looking up certain information and finding an article. It's a very different experience in terms of intent and what you're looking for. It strikes me that pamphlets in the past were about not necessarily uh, people are curious about things, whereas or curious or being given something that challenges them, rather than now with like an article, you might be looking something up with your own intention rather than someone bringing it to you, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not coming out very well, but just a very different experience. And I would like to do more research on the change in communication since the pamphlet has sort of fallen out of popularity.
Do you think that you can make this topic particularly very interesting for people to want to go explore more into it? Like when the way you described in the beginning made it sound like they just dropped it on your doorstep of like, here's this topic. And necessarily you didn't want it, obviously, maybe not, but you liked it now that you're into it and you kind of read more about it. It's kind of like when I try
Mm,
on my shoes, like new shoes or something. I'm like, these things fucking suck. And then I start walking after like an hour or a day or so. And I'm like, all right, I like these are my new favorite shoes. And I've been using that same
yeah.
pair of shoes for 5 years now.
What was your original question?
Did I forgot it?
I
Did you
had an answer and then it just.
do you feel like you can be able to show people that there's this other option or avenue for
Yeah.
information?
Um, I don't know about. I mean, this is the other thing. Like, I think one of the other things that made pamphlets quite exceptional was not in every case, but particularly in the 20th century, there was like cartoons, very interesting, good radical cartoonists that would often illustrate these pamphlets on the front. So you had these really like cool radical illustrations that were quite compelling, and I think that was part of the package, right? And now you get an article, you don't get personal cartoonists coming to doing a cartoon for your article and stuff like that. Um, it was it was much more of a cultural thing and part of like a movement. And I think that's part of one of the reasons they've fallen out of. I mean, we obviously have the internet. The internet's obviously impeded in some ways on the popularity of pamphlets, but I also think that the pamphlet would proliferate. It's always proliferated in history during times of upheaval. And it's interesting that we're at a current period now where there is a lot of upheaval, but we're not seeing that kind of organization that was in the 1930s, for example. So 1930s, there was obviously the Depression and all that jazz and a lot of political sort of polarization. Rise of the Nazis, Communist Party in America was more popular. And the pamphlets proliferated in the millions. There was so many more. Whereas now we don't have that. And it's partially, I think, because there's not any sort of organized movement on the left, at least, because the left wing has been historically the biggest producers of pamphlets because they have been locked out of other medias. So I think there is a distinct lack of organization on the left currently. Uh, but that's not to say that's the only reason there's no pamphlets. It's definitely a internet problem,
That,
whether
it,
good or bad. But yeah,
that's the hard part is just like imagine trying to get a link out there that's basically like a modern day pamphlet saying everyone needs to check this out. It's so hard. I mean,
yeah,
you're lucky if you get people that follow the CDC on Twitter to look at a tweet that maybe gets posted out there. But now people are having trust issues with them because they're so flip flopping on a bunch of stuff where it's like people are just looking to be informed. And I think that's a great thing. But
mm,
damn it, you can't be destructive when you're trying to be informed. You got to try and like sort through a lot of stuff. I mean, your average toilet Googler is the person that knows a lot of information now. Like it's freaking insane. It's weird. I let this politics stuff get so like, rah, and then I
yeah,
stopped doing the show and there was no need to check social trendings. I was off my Twitter, everything for like a month. And then when I started coming back to it, it started dragging me back in. And I'm like, as much as I lost caring about all of it, you can't just go back to just being 100% ramped up, upset about all this type of stuff that's going on. You just gotta live your life the best you possibly can and try and find out what it's got to be true. And
yeah,
if they brought back pamphlets, I feel like a lot of people would accept them because you're having a lot of like I expect the Barnes and Nobles to come back just because people really love that like paper feel, but
yeah,
then they'll go right back to their digital thing because this is here. You don't have to go
yeah.
anywhere.
Mm. Um, well, that was the other thing that I failed to mention before was going back to the kind of cartooning aspect. I kind of feel that there could nobody's done this, or at least nobody on a sort of popular scale. I don't know why I'm holding this in my hand.
Is that a chess
I
piece?
No, it's eye drops.
Oh,
No, I think that pamphlets could become a more popular medium as a political medium if it was used, if there was a sort of movement of radical artists which integrated these essays about certain topics with fun cartoons. And I literally mean fun cartoons, like the cartoons in these pamphlets. I don't know if you like would ever like come across them. You'd never come across them in your day-to-day life probably, but they were fantastic and genuinely quite funny. If you the industrial workers of the world, particularly in the years 1914 to 1919, they had a couple of artists who did cartoons, and they were like hilarious, like they're so pertinent to today as well. And other the Communist Party also had some great artists, although they became a bit less radical as time went on. But they're just fantastic cartoons that really get points across, but in a very funny, accessible way. And I do really feel that if now we could
so
find some good artists to like do stuff like that, I think you could make pamphlets a very distinct thing.
it'll pop up in just a second, but something like this.
No.
No, that's good
Much
art.
it that's great. That's one thing on itself, but it's nothing like
Doesn't have to be so propaganda looking like that one is, but
it's very no, they're just, I mean, what was his name?
that was me.
Ernest Reeb. If you look up a guy called Ernest Reeb, he did this fantastic series called Mr. Block. And it was about this guy who has like this ridiculous amount of faith in the capitalist system, and he keeps getting like screwed over by his own faith in it. And they're just very funny. And he did other stuff as well.
Is it
But
like the kid with the blanket and the imaginary tiger comic that's always out there? Like something like that?
maybe. I'm not sure. Maybe.
I'm looking up
Well,
Ernest as soon as my computer loads.
Ernest Reeb. I think it's Ribe. I'm not sure. Could be EB.
R.I.P.
I always get I before E mixed up, but very funny. And gets really to the point that he's trying to make. And I really think on that note that there are memes of today, I think.
Is his
Like I
is it a cartoon you said?
He's a cartoonist on Ernest
I'm just
Reeb, yeah.
making sure because they're giving me a doctor and I'm like, I don't think that's
No, he's not very well known, so you might not get much information on him. But if you did miss the block as well, but anyway, yeah, I think they're very like some of the stuff is very like
you
the
said Mr.
same.
Block?
Mr. Block, yeah, the same as sort of the memes you get today. And I think if there was this combination of memes with uh, political essays that are easy to read and easy to access, I feel like that would be a really handy thing. But I don't know who's going to do that.
I don't yeah, it just didn't even his name didn't even pop anything up there.
Right.
This is what I
He's
got.
very niche. Let's have a look.
Did it
Mm,
pop up?
no, don't look right. You could put Reeb needs an E.
It has an E in it.
No, next to the I. Either one or the other. I can't remember which one.
Like that?
Yeah, it could be E before I, but I can't remember. There we go. Yeah, these are his. Yeah, in fact, yeah.
I wish it would let
But
me.
they're just, you can't really read them very well, can you? But yeah, he just does jokes about just people breaking strikes and people
This
taking the
anarchist.
side of the bosses. Yeah, he's an anarchist. Well, the IWW is largely an anarchist organization or an industrial unionist, but
I might have to look at these a little bit.
They're pretty good. They get the point across quite well.
Like I can't read that. Maybe I'm just freaking old as shit. Like I just
Yeah,
can't.
I'm too used to looking at stuff like this.
And it's like it's kind of like a political commentation type thing.
Yeah,
Like they
yeah,
used to have these old cartoons, like in school, there'd be something about like the Boston Tea Party or something like that, and they would have an
yeah,
animation
yeah,
of it, and then they would put that in there. It was interesting. I mean, a lot of these old like McGraw Hill textbooks would have old style cartoons like that, and I
yeah,
mean, it's funny stuff. It's stuff that you kind of chuckle, but then you kind of soak in the information, which I think is important. It's kind of like memes, for instance. You'll see
yeah.
something about a meme, and then you'll soak up that information from it. Like I think everyone on Facebook likes one that happens to do with depression because everybody laughs at how
Everyone has
they
depression.
understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, yeah, the best cartoons and the best memes are ones that really get a point across, and you think, oh, yeah, that makes the point really well. Like everyone understands that, and that's what makes it a meme because it gets passed around because everyone understands it. And that's why I mean, like, I do think that these sorts of cartoons were like the memes of the day. There was no memes back then per se, but this was what they were. This is what they were like because they conveyed cartoons like these conveyed the political points so well that people were like, "Oh yeah, I get it."
Yeah. It'll be
So
a, and it's just like the name of my new book. It's called World Consensus of Pain.
cool.
I was gonna write one, but I don't know how to write for crap. Um,
No, neither do I.
is there I seriously definitely want to have you back on, but you gotta let me like study. Can you send me any links to any of your work? Like anything you would think would be I'm gonna look at this
uh,
guy for sure.
yeah,
I just want to be able
yeah,
to like kind of examine a lot of the stuff that you've seen and kind of
yeah. I'm trying to think of what if there's anything good. I'll have a think about it. Yeah, yeah.
um
And I'll see what I can find. Yeah.
is there a place that people can find you? We haven't been talking for 2 hours.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm what am I? JODCOLL Jodcall.
Yeah.
It's my name.
Yeah, you said .con. I was like, is that a
Yeah, sorry, that's not a thing. Yeah, I hope I've been like intelligible. I'm not
I
American, so
I appreciate you giving me your time. I know like you were saying in the beginning you didn't think it was gonna go this way, but I think that's important. I mean, a lot of surprisingly episodes like this people really
yeah,
enjoy because it's not arguing, it's just people having like they're talking about their thoughts, which you don't honestly see a lot of that anymore. A lot of people
yeah,
just want to put their opinion out there and don't really want to see anybody respond unless it's a like or a share.
yeah.
And it's a weird one. But your Instagram or your Twitter is it is
Twitter. Yeah, I don't really
a
use
at
Instagram.
JODCOLL, and I'll link that in the description as well.
Thank you very much.
You got a site?
No.
Are you getting a site?
I'm not advanced enough for
Oh.
that. No, I'm not. I'm but a mere PhD student, so
Now you have a
so
mic, so you have to have like a channel
I
or
do have a
something.
mic. No, this is like an inherited one that I just got, so it's like yeah,
Did you
there's
have a
nothing special.
family member that was
Yeah,
into
yeah,
podcasting?
yeah. My dad does podcasts, so I
What?
just
No
like
way. What's your dad's podcast?
no, I'm not sharing that. I don't know if he'd want me to
Why?
share it.
What?
I don't know if he'd want me to. I don't know because it's completely different.
You can tell me off air, right?
I'll tell you off air.
All
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
sweet.
Don't share it
If he's like a
though.
giant communist guy, I'm gonna laugh. Oh no, I'm kidding. He's all into capitalism. That's
Yeah,
the ironic part to it.
yeah, yeah. It's a
Uh,
twist. Yeah.
But I appreciate you, Judy, for giving me your time. And I'm going to link everything in the description.
Thank
And
you.
for anybody listening, thank you for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank.